Onwards with the early July inquiry and speculation. Not sure question and answer is the right term, but very interesting stuff this time. Let's launch with Lorenzo asking me, what is your favorite text game or not that discusses biology and behaviors within a fictional environment? Not necessarily a bestiary, but the most useful or informative text that made you go, oh, that's how these guys or animals or things should behave. That's a fantastic question. In fact, it may rate as having the highest ratio of I want to be able to say something worthwhile about it to my actual capacity to do so. I don't come up real full with talking about this. I'll say some things, but the probably the best or largest response is that, I should get on to thinking about that, shouldn't I? Let's look at a couple of instances that may or may not be relevant. I just finished playing a multiple session game of Zero, and the fact that that's very recent in my mind probably contributes to naming it. Its brief description of various creatures to be found adjacent to the hive include some wildlife, which I think are particularly well done. Partly because of what they are, partly because of how it's stated in that text. Okay, the dingoes. I have never played Zero without including the dingoes, which I find utterly charming and terrifying. And the text is really quite brief. It doesn't really give you a specific or lengthy kind of, rubric for playing them or special insights into being a dingo. But partly it's because it treats all of its wildlife simply as such, that the dingoes may, certainly prey upon the player characters under specific circumstances. I'm not quite sure how to say it. It's nicely said. And the same thing goes for the effectively harmless large snails that are roaming around and are more available as a food source than anything else. Now, how is that different from tons of other presentations? I think the first one a lot of us encountered was the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Monster Manual. It may not have been the very first list of creatures in role-playing, but it was the first one presented in a sort of encyclopedic fashion, rather than, here's some guys to fight. Although that, of course, is how people read the Monster Manual. The thing I get from it, and I'm going to actually just sort of avoid the whole concept of supernatural monsters, although Lorenzo is asking fairly generically, I'm going to get rid of all of the cosmic, magical, fantasy, science fiction-y kind of things and just set those aside. I want to talk about creatures. I'll also give credit, now that I think about it, let's also turn backwards. No, let's not talk about the AD&D Monster Manual quite yet. Let's step back to Tecmo. Let's step back to the curious talent that Barker had of presenting things which to the characters are part of their landscape, if terrifying and baffling. To the players are heavily evocative of mythology, legend, fantasy, adventure, and yet also to the players, in a sort of more one step removed way, we recognize that this is an interface among high-tech science fantasy fiction, and its long history on the planet. So you get more of a slightly Burroughs feel that, here I am fighting a mythological monster in a very sort of Beowulfy way, but we know that it's, a 10-legged alien lion, and, it's kind of an interesting overlap of concepts. But a big part of it is that the creatures do behave in an ecologically sensible fashion. And even if it's no fashion that you or I would prefer to be involved in, it is not, or if it's inexplicable in terms of the character's perceptions of their circumstances. If it's mysterious to us, then there's some form of underlying logic that may be operative here, that you at least have some belief exists. The author to reach to here is less Burroughs, although there's touches of that, especially in Barsoom, but Vance. Vance had a way of that curious overlap among those concepts, that took some of his most mysterious and unexplained, and occasionally appalling creatures, and yet you sort of said, okay, well, there's an ecology here somewhere. The Tecmo early texts just nail that. And it's no surprise that continued bestiaries for Tecmo have been a priority for everybody who's licensed it. And people have struggled in different ways to try to, to recapture that. Give credit to Jeff D for Baythorn, his adaptation of Tecmo, where he actually redrew a great deal of Barker's illustrations, and gave a great deal of thought, to how he wanted to state what they do. Still, though, the original has a certain, zest and awareness of those overlapping concepts that is hard to recapture, if you're not actually authoring the things. What happens, as I say, is that in something like a Banth in Barsoom, in the fiction, something like one of the strange, predators, like these aquatic things with flaps that markings can sort of look, human on the underside of their belly, and the way they rear up and stuff like that. All of those, partly it's due to easily relating it to creatures that we do know about, and then that helps accept the things that we can't. Much in the way that in the animated How to Train Your Dragon, every single one of the dragons has an animal, at least one animal analog, sometimes several, so that when you see them moving around, you adapt the fantastic elements into something that you know. And so you never stop really thinking of it as a fantasy creature, this dragon, but on the other hand, you're kind of comfy in the way that it operates. So you can make the dragon really strange, and yet you don't have any uncanny valley at all. So anyway, there I am. One reference. Let's hop to Tecmo, the early books, and you'll get a look at that. I'm kind of curious about the Traveler presentation. It's been a long time since I've perused the original booklets, and I actually have reason to do so for one of the courses right now, and am planning on doing that in a couple of days. I'm very curious to see, given the influences on the game, in literature, just how it presents such things. Okay, so then on to the Monster Manual from 1977. And here's again where we get this sort of encyclopedic treatment that has so many virtues in many ways. It's clear that there's some idea that these creatures wander around in a landscape. But if we look at the beasts, the giant ant and the ape, and we don't have to go very far, they're right there in the beginning of the book. And my take is that there's a lot of Hollywood and pulp. By the way, when I say pulp, and someone says Indiana Jones, no, those are TV serials that's based on, the serial episodes. Those are and movie serials. Pulps are books, okay? So I'm real tired of people saying pulp when they mean a particular species of movies that post-date the pulps by decades. Anyways, so to go to the actual pulps and their influence and interaction with Hollywood, and a perfectly good example would be Robert E. Howard, whose apes and snakes and stuff like that have absolutely nothing better to do than gratuitously attack humans. Little bit of Burroughs and Tarzan in that too. I mean, when you don't know what to do, have a lion attack and Tarzan kills it. So here we have this basic idea that these things are here as opponents. We're interested in them when they're berserk. We're interested in them when they are, fur and fangs or scales or whatever coming in on you, or you've trod upon the nest and now all of a sudden all of the little myrmidons are, swarming you. So if you sort of take that as the purpose of this, then all of the other ecological stuff becomes kind of window dressing. And then we get into the kind of bestiaries in the 80s and beyond, where I kind of lose interest. I mean, whatever they lift from an encyclopedia is almost performative relative to the fact that we know that it's there so that you know how to fight a bear. And I think about Poul Anderson's Three Hearts and Three Lions, where the World War II soldier, engineer, of course, it's an Anderson story, is transported to medieval fantasy Europe, and he's wandering around. This is in the early part of the book, and he's wandering around, wondering what the hell has happened and where are all the Nazis and stuff like that. And he comes across various wildlife that really tell him he is not where he thought he was. And one of them is a bear. He's like, there are no bears left in Northern Europe. What am I looking at here? And what does the bear do? It's wandering around being a bear. It doesn't attack him. There's no fight scene with the bear. From a Hollywood standpoint, it's like losing, a whole sector of the movie. He's got to fight the bear. I mean, come on, man. We got the bear. We know how to stage this. I mean, what do you mean the bear just kind of wanders around? I mean, that's not a bear. And so I think that kind of logic is at work in a lot of these, even though a lot of them look very encyclopedic. They're very descriptive without any application, without any sense of activity. And I'm not sure why the presentation of the dingoes in Zero is different, except perhaps in the sense of their activity. It's so weird. I'm thinking about a lot of those monster manual descriptions, which will say something like, well, they will avoid human beings, except they might attack a wounded one or something. And it still lacks something. It's still all about when they're going to attack. And I've found in playing such beings, because in many cases they are literal animals, but in playing such beings, I have found it useful, or at least satisfying to myself, to, for example, if they are magical constructs, or if they are compelled in some fashion to be hostile, the contrast between that behavior and what they would want to do is something that I can play up, something I can actually role play. And I have found that to have a high impact on other players, and preserve pieces of their actual behavior in the context of that compulsion or unnatural quality. I'm thinking of the wolves in the Lamentations of the Flame Princess game that we played a while ago, Lorenzo, in which I played them. I mean, they were magical constructs. They were, manifestations of a hostile or dangerous magical context. But except for that particular phenomenon, I mentioned, their social structure and played one of them differently from the others. And it was, I felt, effective. Now, my job is not to be effective in the sense of a performer. It was fun for me. And I think that was communicated and shared. So my take, I think someone even said when they took down, there's the couple, the male and female leading the little pack, and when the female um, was killed, I think one of the players even said something like, "I feel bad." So again, I don't really feel like I'm answering very well. What texts would I mean, I don't really want to give, anybody a huge line of, animal behavior texts, um, because my bibliography for that is very technical, and I'm not sure I can ask people to try to incorporate their own experiences with, non-humans, with animals. Um, I can ask people to do that. I can say, who rides horses, and just as simple as if a character walks around a horse, a non-player character, for example, if I'm the GM and I'm playing this non-player character, I'll just mention how they put a hand on their withers. That's their hip for you non-horsey people. Put their hand on their withers as they walk behind them. The horse knows that this means, hey, it's me. Don't kick me. Don't please don't cripple me, horse. And it's just part of what you do. When you walk around a horse, put your hand on a relevant piece, and the horse kind of knows you're there, and isn't startled. You moved out of their field of vision. Now they feel the hand, and it's interactive. To doing that kind of thing, insofar as anything, and not turning to the Hollywood deal, which is where a horse is basically a vehicle, or not turning to the D&D encounter thing, and that's stereotyping, but it is an accurate stereotype to a certain proportion, that if it has hit points, it's going to attack you. That's what it's for. So, have I really answered the question? Not really. What I'm saying is, if we look through gaming texts, what do we see in those bestiaries that actually avoids those problems? One, just invoking Hollywood, and two, just troweling on, lifted encyclopedia content and sticking it on there in sort of as a filler, or showing off that you looked it up. And furthermore, finding those few individualized texts. I named two. Oh, an Axial's roster for then called Hero Wars, I think also did a really nice job, in the sense that the game is based, as are many, on a list of terms that are just basically made up for that creature, and then they each one have an effectiveness rating. So the little lapdogs, have it's not like they all have various hit points, but that what they have instead is a set of things that they do, in each one with some kind of effectiveness rating. And the nice thing about the way it's done in an Axial's roster is that it's not immediately apparent toward what purpose it's supposed to fulfill in plot terms. It's just something that folds into the situation that this creature is in. And as with many of the Hero Wars thing, could be advantageous to the creature or disadvantageous to it. And also in your interactions near it, advantageous to you or disadvantageous to you. So therefore, it's kind of a rich little set of content that goes with having this creature in play. And what shall come of it is, well, depends what else is going on and who's doing what. So those are three then that I can name off the cuff, and I know that there are more. I mean, there have to be more. Look at all these freaking role-playing books I'm surrounded by here, and we know that there are more. But it's going to be a bit of an effort, I think, for me to start looking through the spines, of the books on the shelf, or flipping through a few and kind of remembering or rediscovering, oh yeah, I really liked the way this one presented it. Even though each one just is a creatures section in this book and that book, this one is a complete waste of space, no matter how detailed. And this one is compelling, and I want to play the Dingoes. Maybe we should have a group discussion about this at some point and see what people have done or felt or utilized. And as far as non-role playing references are concerned, I shall put my mind to that. I shall start thinking about that and seeing. To some extent, such references for me are so embedded in my memory and personality that I don't even think about them anymore. I mean, books that I've read all the way back to when I was little, and experiences that I've had, with creatures and about creatures since then is, deeply compelling. It's hard for me to say, for example, read this about the fruit bats. That'll set you up. I mean, that's embedded too deeply for me to access. But I'll see what I can do thinking about that.